A few years ago, a dear friend and colleague of mine at work at the Sims Mann Center, Lorelei Bonet, was preparing a lecture to give to an upcoming oncology social work conference. "What are you going to talk about, Lorelei?" "Ecotones," she said. I never heard that word before. What, is that some kind of a retro punk environmental cover band? Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for the Ecotones. No, she went on to explain it's those transitional zones in nature between two adjacent ecosystems or communities, like where a grassland meets a forest or where a river meets the sea. I love that there was a word for those places in nature that fascinate me. She was using it as a metaphor for places that cancer patients often find themselves caught between competing realities. I love it as a metaphor for any of us as we move into life's deeper mysteries, crossing boundaries and thresholds into territory that is not exactly one thing or the other, despite all of our need to see it as such. And yet I find it is in those liminal places that perhaps we have greater access to truth, or maybe even brush up against the sacred. In the summer of 2005, I took a week-long workshop on Cape Cod with Thomas More, the well-known author and psychologist. He's made his life's work a study of the nature of soul. He constructed the workshop in such a way that we only spent half days together because he wanted us to spend the other half of the day out on the Cape, letting it work its magic on us. He didn't have to tell me twice. I fell in love with the place, particularly the marshes and wetlands, these ecotones that are neither land nor sea, changing moment to moment with the shifting of the tide. That love affair continues to this day. Every summer, ever since, Scott and I spend a week in Provincetown, the very tip of Cape Cod. One of my favorite things to do is to float effortlessly on the incoming or outgoing tide over the marsh. The water is so saline you can float effortlessly, swallowed up into this magical netherworld. A sunrise or a sunset can be a kind of ecotone too, a frame of time that is neither dark nor light, neither day nor night, and yet it is in that time frame when all the most spectacular beauty happens, isn't it? All those magnificent colors. I love the word evening, even for its unintended implication, an evening out of day into night. In February of 2019, I took a solo journey across southern India, from east to west, starting in Chennai and ending in Cochin. The penultimate stop on my itinerary was a teeny village called Muthuvankudi, high in the mountains, the Western Ghats they're called, in Kerala. It's very near a village called Munnar. It's a region that's known for tea and spice plantations. I spent 2 nights at the Ecotones Lodge, if you could imagine. 8 Spartan rooms situated in the most stunning landscape imaginable. One night, I was the only guest at the lodge. When I arrived, I immediately booked 2 guided walks with a local guide, Vishak. Vishak was 27, bright, engaging, curious. He knew everything about every plant and animal, about every crop. He knew everything about every bird in the neighborhood. He was 27 years old. He had a wanderer's heart himself, and he dreamed of destinations far from Kerala, though wasn't quite sure he'd even heard of Los Angeles. Our first walk would be that afternoon that I arrived, called a spice and culture walk. We walked through fields and plantations, through jungles, through villages, down pathways, talking every step of the way about everything. We even got caught in an afternoon rain shower, and we took refuge on one of the villagers' porches, and she was so sweet she came out and brought me a chair to sit down. It was an enchanted afternoon. Our next walk would be the next morning, a sunrise walk. He told me he'd pick me up at 5:30. I set my alarm for 5 o'clock, got up and took a cold shower because it just seemed like 10 more minutes of sleep was more valuable than the slim chances of getting any hot water. So I got dressed, went outside a little early because my host, C. Joe, had promised me a hot cup of tea. The super full moon was still high in the sky, illuminating the landscape in this eerie, silvery glow. casting moon shadows everywhere. The breathing stillness of the morning soothed my soul, the coolness, the silence. When Vishak arrived, thank goodness he had brought a flashlight, because once we got under the canopy of trees, it was so dark you could not see your hand in front of your face. We walked in silence mostly. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under our feet. But soon birds began to awake, sing to one another, and then there was the call to prayer from a nearby mosque. And we walked a few feet further, and then there was a gong and chanting from a Hindu temple. Once we emerged out from under the canopy of trees back into the moonlight, we didn't need the flashlight any longer. Vishak took a hard left turn up a steep path. "This way, Michael," he called out. We scrambled up over rocks and boulders until we landed on this enormous slab of granite, this enormous plinth high on this precipice with this stunning view of the valley around us. "We will wait here for the sun," he said. "Okay?" Oh, it was more than okay. Emily Dickinson once said, "I'll tell you how the sun rose, one ribbon at a time." It wasn't like that for me that morning. I was transfixed by the clouds enshrouding the mountaintops on the valleys around us, creating another kind of ecotone. You couldn't tell where the land ended and the sky began. And just then this pink glow began to emerge from behind one of the mountains, and this renegade appendage of clouds swirls up in the sky, its edges catching the hidden sunlight below. Looked like a fire-breathing dragon, and just like that, it was gone as quickly as it appeared. And then the sun rose and shone itself and announced the beginning of a new day. We sat there for maybe 45 minutes or so. Soon there was more chanting, men's voices, in Latin this time, from the Catholic Church in the valley beneath us. And when they stopped chanting, women began to sing. And then the two voices blended in beautiful harmony. It was a moment of exquisite perfection. Vishak said, "Everyone needs this every once in a while." "Yes, they do," I said. "Vishak, does this ever get old for you? Is this just another day at work?" "No, I like this," he said. "It's never quite the same." I was feeling the oddest combo platter of feelings in that moment. Of course, deep, profound gratitude for being able to be here and witness this, but also this urgent need to imprint my memory with every sight, every color, every smell, every sensation, because I had this acute awareness, I will never pass this way again. And of course, that's true of every moment in which we live, isn't it? But somehow it seemed more true on that rock. As one who, I confess, is rather greedy and always wants more, I also found myself reflecting on time and thinking, even with the best of luck, the years left for me are fewer than the years I've had some of the clothes in my closet. So there was kind of sadness too, and longing. I wanted everybody I loved to be with me there, to enjoy this moment on that rock, especially my mom. But don't get me wrong, the essential feeling was gratitude. This moment is enough. This lifetime is enough. Vishak, I asked, "Do you know what that word Ecotones means, the name of the lodge where I'm staying?" "Yes, I think it means like eco-friendly, no?" And I said, "No, it actually means a place in nature where two ecosystems meet, and they're not one thing or another, like where the river meets the sea or a meadow meets a forest, or where your life, as different as it is, meets my life here on this rock." "Yes," he said. I wasn't entirely sure he understood the depth of my meaning, but I knew I was experiencing something akin to Holy Communion in that sacred ecotone on that rock. Living with cancer can definitely be a kind of ecotone. I've walked beside countless patients who wonder, how do I make decisions? How do I hold this going forward? Do I live as if I have all the time in the world, or do I live as if today is my last day? What if it's neither? And what if it's both? And if I have to live like the latter, that it's my last day, how do I live with that kind of pressure to have to make every moment so profound and make it count? Wouldn't that rob me of the sweetness of everyday life, the simplicity of that, the luxury of wasting time? Dying can be a kind of ecotone too. Ask anyone who's walked beside a loved one through their dying process, a process that can take years, watching someone slip away by inches, wondering how much of the person we knew and loved is even still there. Such was the case with my mom over the last few years of her life, as dementia enshrouded her sense of clarity, even her sense of herself, only parting every now and then to give us a glimpse of the mom we knew and remembered, only to be swallowed up again, until COPD and a return of lung cancer showed her to the final exit on April 7th, 2019, 3 years ago. I saw her for the last time on March 30th, 8 days earlier. A year earlier, May 2018, Mother's Day, Scott and I went to see her. She lived on the Central Coast near Morro Bay. We took her out to lunch in San Luis Obispo, walked around a little bit, and then we just parked it on a bench in the main plaza there in front of the mission. It was exasperating and exhausting to listen to the same endless closed-loop tape of complaints and frustration and disappointment and anger. Anecdotes I'd heard 10,000 times before. But still, it was a beautiful day, and it seemed far more pleasant to sit here on this bench and have this conversation, if you will, rather than sit for endless hours in her mobile home in front of HGTV. But just then, an idea dropped into my head from someplace else altogether. 16 years earlier, after my mom had survived lung cancer treatment, I took a couple days off of work and went to visit her with the express purpose of interviewing her on videotape exhaustively about her life, what she'd picked up along the way. In 2 days' time, we made 6 hours of videotape. I had never watched the tape since we made it. But that afternoon, it occurred to me, Mom, you want to maybe go home and look at that video, that interview we made 16 years ago? Of course, she had no recollection of it, that it even existed, but she was game. Sure, honey, that sounds like fun. Let's do that. My intention was twofold. I wondered what kind of gift there might be for my mom to give her her own story back to herself. Might there even be a kind of magic in that? Selfishly, I also wanted to connect to that version of my mom I so dimly remembered. And that's not accurate. Of course, I remember her. I just couldn't connect that version of my mom with this disappointed and frustrated woman in front of me with her shadow spilling out everywhere. So that afternoon and evening, we got through 4 hours of the videotape in 2 sittings. My mom was transfixed by the process, though thoroughly confused. Now, where was this done and why did we do it? Asking only inches from where the camera had been set up, seated in the same chair. Look, Mom, it's your same chair. It's the doorknob of your front door right there. But still, she was enthralled. This is something, but I just can't get over it. I can't quite accept that that's me. I mean, I know it's me. And I remember these stories when she tells them, talking about herself in third person. But she seems so professional-like. I know. I was shocked too. But this is fun, honey. Thank you for doing it. The hour grew late. She was tired, so we all went to bed. The next morning, she had no recollection that the tape existed or that she had watched it. A month later, Scott and I went back to see her again. We watched the last 2 hours. This would be a far more intense experience for a host of reasons. I had long forgotten that her late beloved Glenn made a surprise appearance in our interview. It was such a treat to see his smiling, playful self. Oh, there's my Glennie, Mom howled. Hi, honey. I did remember that she closed the interview with a rather tearful valedictory to each of her 3 kids, wanting us to remember more than anything else how much she loved us. The next morning, to my shock and amazement, she remembered the whole thing. Wasn't that something last night, she said. I just can't get over it. But you know what? It made me feel like it's not so bad to get old, because I just don't care anymore. Everything that used to matter so much, I worried about forever, I just don't care. So thank you, honey. Thank you for doing that. The tide had brought my mom back to me. For a moment, we could float around in that ecotone until she drifted off again. Earlier that year, that February, my sister Terry had thrown my mom the most magnificent 90th birthday party. It was truly a splendid evening, but shortly afterward, she began to decline sharply, and after a few days in the hospital and a week or so in rehab, she was sent home on hospice. Just to give my sister a break, who had done all the heavy lifting with respect to my mom's care in recent years, truly an heroic effort, I took a couple days off from work to give Terry a break. I knew that this would likely be the last time I would ever see my mom, though she did not. She did not understand that she was on hospice, nor that she would not be getting any better. I, of course, had my hopes and expectations of how I wanted that time to be. I wanted to be so fully present, awake, aware, conscious of the enormity of this threshold we were walking across together. I'm sure it will surprise no one here to know that life doesn't always give us what we want. My mom was so thoroughly confused when she got home from rehab. On one hand, she knew it was her house, but she would keep asking, was my bedroom always here? Did I always have a window on that wall? Was my TV always in the corner? I had the oddest parallel experience of confusion and disorientation. Is this really my mom? Is this really the last time I'm ever going to see her? Forever? But I was present to her as a caregiver, as a chaplain of sorts, but not as her son exactly. I was so busy tending to the next task, getting the next set of meds ready, getting the next meal prepared, answering the same question 3,000 times as patiently as I could. I just couldn't quite connect with the emotional gravity of the moment. But I was present to her. On Saturday afternoon that weekend, my last day with my mom, we were sitting around the table reminiscing. I wanted to tell you that maybe, how many years earlier would that have been? In '06, thanks to my husband Scott, I took my mom on a one-week trip to Spain. And we had the most magnificent time. We were in Cordoba, and we were walking back to the bus stop to catch the bus back to the hotel. And there was kind of a chill in the air, and we're on the shady side of the street. So I said, Mom, why don't we cross the street over there on the sunny side? Maybe it's a little warmer. And just like that, we both broke into spontaneous song. Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worry on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. There we were, singing and dancing our way across the street in Cordoba, Spain. Well, that last afternoon together, that Saturday, we were seated at her kitchen table, and I was reminiscing about so many of the trips we'd gone on, and particularly that trip, and I asked her about that time we crossed the street. And she sang the song again. We sang it together. She knew every word. That, too, was a kind of ecotone, a kind of bridge between our very disparate realities in that moment, which in the end weren't so disparate after all. But still, the moment I had dreaded since I was 4 years old, and the nuns at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Catholic Church explained to all of us that we're all gonna die, even my mom. Well, that day was here. And I wasn't there for it. Not in the way I wanted to be anyway. But we did have our song. That following August, after she died, Scott and I had our week in Provincetown. I was out at Herring Cove Beach, tucked into the side of a sand dune, sitting under my beach umbrella in the pouring rain, watching the tide come in, waiting for it to get deep enough to go for a swim. Like my mom, I always loved the rain. That afternoon, I was the only one out on the beach at Herring Cove. Earlier that morning, my brother Steve had sent my sister and me an email. He had come upon a poem my mom had written. My mom had always written poetry. And based on the tone of this one, I'm guessing it was before Glenn had come into her life. So she was maybe in her late 50s, early 60s, roughly my age. My mom had always written poetry, ever since she was a lovesick teenager working as a cashier in the box office at the Old Egyptian Theater in downtown Long Beach. All alone in the box office and in life, it would seem. She called this one Ageless, and she was reflecting on the serenity that she still felt when it rained, a feeling that was just as vivid now as it had been when she was a much younger woman, even a little girl, leading her to conclude that we are, perhaps ageless, at least in the way life can get in and work us over. In recent years, it had been harder and harder to connect to that ageless part of my mom, wondering where it was. And now that she's gone, it's hard to know which version of my mom I'm even grieving at any point in time, which was the ageless part, which is the essential part. I so desperately wanted to connect to that. I was sitting there soaking wet, staring at my phone, rereading and rereading that poem, trying to connect to it, and I just couldn't. So sad. My friend Rosa reminds me that a womb is an ageless place too. A place that is neither existence nor non-existence. Definitely a kind of ecotone. Michael, you were huddled into that earthly womb next to that sand dune, all wet, next to a marsh. What better place could there be to contemplate your mother? That experience, that magical experience of an ecotone can be what one of my patients once called a God moment, I think. A moment when not much really happens, when the stuff and business of life falls away, just leaving space and room for awareness that this moment is all that there is. An opening perhaps to an awareness of love, of connection, of enoughness. A moment like floating effortlessly on the incoming tide in Provincetown over a marsh. Or a moment like admiring a sunrise in Kerala, India, seated next to my new friend Vishak. Or a moment like singing a song with my mom one last time. Ageless, perhaps yes, after all, with gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street. So be it. Thank you.